We have seen growing evidence that the dangers to our country can come not only across borders, but from violence that gathers within. There is little cultural overlap between violent extremists abroad and violent extremists at home. But in their disdain for pluralism, in their disregard for human life, in their determination to defile national symbols, they are children of the same foul spirit, and it is our continuing duty to confront them.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York. 20 years ago, our country faced a terrible and very realized threat from foreign terrorists. But now, that same foul spirit, as the former president spoke to, comes from within, from inside our country. In those comments on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, former President George W. Bush warned about the threat of domestic terrorism, concerned about the hatred and divisiveness hardening itself within our country. He expressed how the unity he witnessed 2 decades ago in the wake of the attack on our country is now lacking. Bush's warning made even more salient in light of this news from the Capitol Police today. Around midnight, U.S. Capitol Police arrested a man from California outside the DNC headquarters in Washington, D.C. We're going to warn you now that the images we will show you display a symbol of hate. These are pictures from the Capitol Police showing the man's pickup truck with a swastika and other white supremacist symbols painted on it. Officers saw a bayonet and a machete, which are illegal in D.C., inside his truck. The man told police he was on patrol and began talking to them about things pertaining to white supremacy. Police said in their report they do not know if he was planning to attend any upcoming demonstrations or if he has ties to any previous cases in the area. This arrest comes as the city is already on high alert. A rally in support of those arrested for their roles in the Capitol riot, called Justice for J6, is set to be held this Saturday in Washington, D.C. Law enforcement is taking steps to make sure it doesn't turn into anything resembling another January 6th. Earlier today, U.S. Capitol Police Chief Tom Manger held a security briefing at the Capitol for House and Senate leaders. Here he is speaking to reporters after that briefing.
We just briefed him about the demonstration that's scheduled for September 18th, just the intelligence information that we're aware of and a little bit about our operational plan, about what we plan to do.
Have you requested that the fence be built?
Yes. The fence will go up a day or two before, and if everything goes well, it'll come down very soon after.
But the emotional trauma of the deadly insurrection still has not healed, as the fuel that inspired that attack, the big lie, is still being disseminated all across this country. Reporting in the New York Times finds that the common refrains Republicans have pushed to explain Donald Trump's loss are now being used to sow distrust around a race that hasn't even happened yet, tomorrow's California recall. From that reporting, quote, soon after the recall race was announced in early July, the embers of 2020 election denialism ignited into new false claims on right-wing news sites and social media channels. This vote, too, would supposedly be stolen, with malfeasance ranging from deceptively designed ballots to nefariousness by corrupt postal workers. This swift embrace of false allegations of cheating in the California recall reflects a growing instinct on the right to argue that any lost election or any ongoing race that might result in defeat must be marred by fraud. The relentless falsehoods spread by Mr. Trump and his allies about the 2020 election have only fueled such fears. The ongoing fight against domestic extremism to protect our homeland and our democracy is where we start this hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Clint Watts is here, former consultant to the FBI Counterterrorism Division. He's now a distinguished research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and an MSNBC national security analyst. Also joining us, former Congresswoman Donna Edwards, Washington Post contributing columnist and an MSNBC contributor, and Nick Corsanides here, New York Times domestic correspondent who's reporting about the big lie in the California recall we quoted from at the top of the show. Nick, I want to start with you because it dawns on me that should Governor Newsom prevail, and all the polls suggest that he will, you could have the President of the United States and the governor of the largest state viewed as illegitimate by, nearly 40% of their constituents.
Yeah, and I think we're already seeing that. I know former President Trump today released a statement calling the California election rigged, and a few days ago he said the same thing. I predict that it will be a rigged election. And it just kind of follows what we've seen on social media and in conservative news sites for the past few months, ever since the California recall election became a reality, there's been, mentions of fraud kind of continually fueled by former President Trump's continual statements about the 2020 election. And then when it looked like Governor Newsom was doing a little bit better in polling and he was expanding his advantage there, then it got way more accelerated and way more prevalent. You saw on Fox News hosts like Tomi Lahren say the only way Newsom can win is because of fraud. Former President Trump kept talking about fraud. Larry Elder on the campaign trail started talking about concerns about quote-unquote shenanigans and voter fraud. He set up an election security or an election integrity outfit designed for any voters who are out there, acting to try and find fraud to send in tips. So I think it's been this kind of bedrock almost of the Republican base to just view voter fraud as endemic to the United States, especially when they're losing, and it's something that only benefits Democrats. And it's just been fed to them by everyone they trust, from President Trump to some of their most trusted news sources. So no matter what, it looks like, at least in the immediate future, this is going to be a reality when you have a clear victor with no evidence of fraud, be that the President of the United States, possibly Governor Newsom tomorrow, viewed as illegitimate simply because there's been such a corrosive attempt to undermine their success by these false claims of fraud.
And Clint, it's not just illegitimate and therefore weakening their authority to mandate vaccines to convince their constituents that they're safe. George W. Bush tied those lies to domestic terrorism. I mean, to tie the president who pursued policies that are divisive to this hour of this day, to say that the threat from al-Qaeda is the same as what is today the threat from within. There are threats in both parties. There's threats in one party. There are lies being told by one party, and they're being told by Republicans at the highest level, because by refusing to knock them down, you are greenlighting them. They're being swallowed hook, line, and sinker by voters. What do you make of that? Was it overdue? Will it sink in?
Nicole, I think it was long overdue, and it just was remarkable that the war on terror, at least for me, the global war on terror was 2 decades, and it was bookended by 2 speeches by George W. Bush. I remember him down at the World Trade Center after the attacks, and to hear him that day and so poignantly point out that what we worried about the last 20 years is really not a global war on terror, but it's an American war on terror within, at this point. And that's where we've come to, is this divisiveness. It was a remarkable speech. I think it also points the driving factor of this is when elected leaders and political candidates drive their supporters to believe things that are false and mobilize them to violence. Over the last 20 years, we talked about guys like bin Laden, Awlaki, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. They were the ones who were putting out the vision, the justifications for violence. Instead, today, what we worry about is, will elected leaders come up with bogus claims about election fraud? Will they make up some sort of conspiracies about vaccines? Will they put out some sort of lie about COVID-19 being real? And in so doing, either kill their voters and supporters just through negligence, that's the case of COVID-19 and vaccines at this point, or mobilize them to violence. I mean, on January 6th, I believe it was 5 people that died in the course of that. And most of those were still Trump supporters. Those were people that went there and they died that day over a completely bogus story. And so to watch our elected leaders continue to foment that, what usually ends up happening is those that feel betrayed in the end when they find out the election wasn't rigged, or there is no fraud, or that vaccines do work, will come for them someday. And that's where extremism will turn its ugly head. And it could be at the Capitol, it could be a state and local Capitol, it could be in any of our towns around America at this point.
The FBI has released a long secret document from its investigation into possible connections between the 9/11 hijackers and the government of Saudi Arabia. It comes as the nation marked the 20th anniversary at Ground Zero here in New York, at the Pentagon just outside Washington, at the Flight 93 National Memorial in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and at countless events across the country and beyond. ABC's Trevor Ault on what that FBI document revealed.
Tonight, as countless American families remember their loved ones lost in the September 11th attacks, President Biden honoring their request to declassify and disclose new documents While heavily redacted, they reveal details of the investigation into Saudi nationals in the U.S. who helped some of the 9/11 hijackers, though they make no conclusion as to whether Saudi Arabia's government was involved. These 16 pages are the first to be released since the president announced last week he'd begin doing so. Hundreds of affected families and survivors had told Biden if he didn't start that process, he wouldn't be welcome at Saturday's memorial.
These memorials are really important, but they're also incredibly difficult for the people who are affected by it.
This weekend, America renewing its resolve to never forget the sacrifices and heroism that day 20 years ago, nor the thousands of lives lost.